They told me I wasn't gonna get far. So I told them like this, look.
What's up, amigos? It's the Prodigy Maker Minute with yours truly, Chris Lewitt. As you may know, I'm the former #1 for Cornell University, pro circuit player, elite junior development coach, and author and educator, author of The Secrets of Spanish Tennis and the Tennis Technique Bible. On this Prodigy Maker Minute, I want to talk about Daniil Medvedev. Recently, we've been talking about some different professional players and how they relate to the Spanish model of training and Spanish tennis values and tennis virtues. And I think Medvedev is another guy like Djokovic, whom I really love. I love Djokovic's game. I love Medvedev's game. Now, Medvedev is interesting because he has kind of funky technique, and his technique is definitely, I would say, idiosyncratic, to be nice, to say it nicely. If you look at his biomechanics, they're a little funky, and he has sort of a hybrid old school, new school forehand where he sort of a lot of times wraps around the neck very high, which is very unusual nowadays, with more windshield wiper finishes being more common. But he also combines that with a lot of reverse finishes and lasso type finishes. So it's a very strange hybrid forehand and a very flatly struck backhand, but his game works for him. And I say he reminds me of a Spanish player, or he exemplifies many Spanish virtues. I'll just sort of explain to you what I mean by that. Number one, he's a big guy who moves incredibly well. He's incredibly fit. He has tremendous stamina. He has tremendous fight. And these are sort of the check boxes, the boxes you want to check for the Spanish way, or if you were in Spain and you were a player training in Spain, or if you were a Spanish coach, you would definitely want to try to like check a lot of these boxes. And so he strikes me as a player who exemplifies many of the things they're looking to develop in Spain. So he's great mover, especially for a big guy, very good defender and counter puncher, very good stamina. So he's in great condition and he can go the distance. You know, he can go 12-round fight if he needs to. It can get to the 10th round or 12th round or the 5th round of an MMA main event for those of you who are MMA fans. And he's a tremendous fighter. Speaking of MMA, you know, that's very prototypically Spanish, you know, to have this tremendous never say die attitude and to be a warrior on the court. I love that about Medvedev. Medvedev has an excellent serve. I think sometimes an underrated serve. So when you combine like a big guy who's very fit and moves well with a strong serve, a little bit unorthodox ground strokes, but who cares? That almost in and of itself is very classically Spanish. Back in the day, like in the 70s, 80s, even in the 90s to some extent, Spanish players tended to be clay court specialists. And there were many Spanish players who were successful on tour who had holes in their game, had kind of a little bit funky, maybe they had funky grips or funky techniques. And Daniil sort of reminds me of that kind of throwback Spanish player, you know, dating back to the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And what's interesting is there's been an evolution in Spain where players are starting to become out of Spain more clean with their technique, more conservative grips. Daniil has very conservative grips, but just in general, you know, you don't see as many funky kind of technical shots coming out of strokes coming out of Spain nowadays. At least I see that trend. Whereas in the past, you know, you'd have some clay court specialists they do some funky things and they'd be maybe effective on clay, but wouldn't be able to hack it on other faster surfaces. So you always had a chance against a Spanish guy back in the day because there's probably some technical hole you could find in their game. And Daniil reminds me a little bit of that because his game is idiosyncratic, but he's able to play really, really, really well. I don't want to insult the Daniil fans, but he kind of wins ugly. He has kind of an ugly game, and he wins very well with that game, which is I mean that, and I'm giving him the highest praise for that. But what's happening in Spain is the coaches are aware of that history, and they're trying very hard to develop players who are very clean biomechanically, conservative grips, conservative backswings, players who can take the ball relatively earlier and be successful on all courts. And that's a new development in Spain. Many older school kind of coaches in Spain and academies in Spain never used to focus on that kind of thing, or some of them still don't. But the younger guard in Spain, the next generation of coaches in Spain are developing players who are much cleaner technically and much more with fewer holes, who can succeed on all surfaces. And that is an interesting trend in the Spanish game. Alcaraz is a perfect example of that. A player who has very, very clean technique biomechanically, if you contrast him to Medvedev, for example. Very, very clean and pretty technique. That's something that in Spain, Spanish players used to have somewhat of a reputation that they weren't very pretty. Their games weren't very nice to look at. And I think that's changing to a certain extent too. Spanish players are not only their techniques looking good, but it also works and they win and fight, So Daniil Medvedev, Russian dude, but very, very Spanish. He's got the Spanish DNA, a lot like Djokovic. Guys, if you like this Prodigy Maker Minute, check out my big show, Prodigy Maker Show. We're coming out with a bunch of new episodes soon, so check out that podcast or the YouTube show on this channel. I'll see you guys on the next program.
Man, you don't want to see me in this circle. I'm killing you, kid. Young Jay, I'm bad. They told me that.